Good morning and welcome to the Children's Museum of Atlanta's Town Square, a virtual series designed for families, educators, and the community to learn about and discuss important issues and challenges that are weighing on so many, particularly now. Children's museums around the country, and Atlanta's no exception, serve as town squares for families with young children. We're a gathering place where all are invited to explore, engage, and learn in the way that children learn best, through play. We're not about any one topic, we're about all topics, and we're about the child and introducing them to new experiences and people, and to create an environment that sparks self-exploration, discovery, and learning. We have always worked to be a welcoming place, and our exhibits and programs at the museum and out in the community have highlighted and celebrated a number of topics, from science and math to geography, engineering, visual arts, performing arts, literacy, and importantly, the many cultures that make Atlanta the diverse and enriching community that it is. Over the past few months, we've been hearing from a lot of families and educators who are seeking meaningful conversations, information, resources, and ideas to help them navigate this very challenging time and have what can often be difficult conversations. We're living in a challenging time, not only because of the impact of coronavirus, but also because of the recent social unrest calling out for change to address systemic racism and bias that has permeated our society since its founding. Today, I am thrilled to introduce Dr. Stacy French-Lee. Stacy is a longtime friend and partner of the Children's Museum of Atlanta. She has been an early childhood education advocate, practitioner, and leader in the National Association for the Education of Young Children accredited programs. She's been instrumental in developing responsive and equity-based programs, policies, and practices alongside children, families, community members, and teachers. Her list of accomplishments and areas of involvement are long and deep. Stacy is a clinical assistant professor at Georgia State University in their Department of Early Childhood and Elementary Education, where she's a core faculty member in the Birth to Five Teacher Degree and Certification Program, and in their Master of Arts in Creative and Innovative Education program. She's also the executive director of the two Georgia State University campus child care centers. Stacy, welcome to our town square.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you for that introduction. First, I want to thank the Children's Museum of Atlanta and you for creating the time and the space to have these very critical and very important conversations. And thank you very much for inviting me to participate. A little more, thank you.
No, I was just going to say thank you. I just wanted to hear a little bit about your work that you do.
Okay, well, as you all that you said, also I've been a practitioner in the field of birth through five early care and learning for over 30 years. I have experience in the United States and Europe. My experience is in military, corporate, and university settings. And as you said earlier, also, currently I'm a clinical assistant professor at Georgia State University. And in my work at Georgia State University in the teacher education program, and also in my work in the Child Development Center, my work is framed through a lens of social justice. Particularly, I think with, and my worldview is informed by theoretical frameworks, including critical race theory, intersectionality, and community cultural wealth. So I'm always looking to dismantle and challenge and push back against systems and barriers that prevent people from living lives of justice.
That is so fascinating and so important right now. You've talked about, I know I've heard you talk about childhood as a social construction and intersecting identities. Can you let our listeners know what you mean by these terms?
Sure. So sociologists see childhood, or the experience of childhood, as being socially constructed. So what that means is that it's something that was created and defined by society. However, sociologists and I kind of push back against this idea of a universal and neutral childhood experience. We know that based on place and time and race, childcare is not neutral or universal for all children, but it differs tremendously between children based even on their socioeconomic status. So I work to critique and dismantle this ideal of childhood as a social construction. So in my classes, when I am teaching, no matter what class it is in the teacher education department, I'm always starting off with this ideal of childhood as a social construct. So when you're talking about children, when I'm teaching about any topic, I always foreground it with what child are we talking about? So these curriculum models, classroom management models, none of these things are neutral. They were created for a particular child. And we have to take a critical lens to these things to really figure out what child. And so how are we going to make it appropriate for the children in our classroom? The children who are sitting in classrooms in North Fulton are very different. Our experience in childhood may be very differently from the children who are sitting in classrooms in South Fulton. So we have to figure out what child we're teaching to. And so the primary way I do this is to think about, I utilize an intersectional framework to think about children. Simply put, intersectionality is a Black feminist theory. You know, we could talk about this for an hour or two. So I'm going to simply define it as a theory that helps us understand how a person's social and political identities may combine or interlink or interlock or intersect in unique ways that create modes of discrimination or privilege. So for example, African-American children, because of their race and their gender, they often experience certain oppression, discrimination, or not equity in the classroom settings. And African-American boys and African-American girls experience these kinds of oppression and discrimination and inequity in different ways based on the way that boys and girls, Black boys, Black girls, Black men, and Black women have been racialized and stereotyped in society. For example, African-American boys are often stereotyped and racialized as misbehaving. And so because of their race and their gender, those two things kind of interlock and interlink and cause certain outcomes for them in the classroom. African-American girls are often racialized and stereotyped along the same lines that African-American women are. So they're seen as loud and misbehaving and promiscuous. So they face discrimination in classroom settings and inequities based on the way their gender and race interact based on those two identities. And you can also add socioeconomic status. So race, gender, and socioeconomic status. So the experience of an African-American boy or girl from a lower socioeconomic status community is very different from the experience of an African-American boy or girl in a higher socioeconomic status community. So that's why it's so important to dismantle and critique and push back about this social construction of childhood is this time of joy and ease, because that's not the experience that all children have an opportunity to live.
What age would you say this starts manifesting itself? Is it very young? Is it older?
We see it happening very early. My dissertation research included African-American boys and girls as young as 3 and 4, and from reports of their parents, they're experiencing these kinds of things very early. Also, the research supports that African-American children are suspended and expelled at much higher rates than their counterparts as early as preschool and pre-K. And so this is why we have this whole preschool to prison pipeline. The researchers study and have collected evidence that there is a thing that's going on in classrooms that cause the children to be, African-American children to be overrepresented in school discipline and underrepresented in gifted programs, for example. Also, by the time they're in second grade, the research shows that they're already seen as adults. And so I think Corey Kane talked about this when she spoke with you last week about the adultification of children, Black children. So often their behavior is seen as adult behavior. So you see in schools that are in lower socioeconomic status community, their behavior is criminalized rather than them being treated as developmentally appropriate childhood behavior. They're actually criminalized and pushed into the criminal justice system at early ages.
Wow, that is really alarming and interesting. So I am assuming that as you are working in the teaching degree program, especially focused on this birth to 5 years old, how do you address this with these people who are seeking to enter the classroom as teachers? How do you prepare them to combat this, if you will?
So one thing that I do to really help teachers understand the importance of equity in their classroom practices, in choices of curriculum and choices of activities that they're going to introduce the children to in the classroom is to not apply a deficit lens to African-American children or children of color or poor children, to look at them from an asset-based model. So I often teach, there's a scholar and a researcher, Yoso. So Yoso presents a model called community cultural wealth, and it's an asset-based model. And in this model, we're looking at the rich talents and skills and cultural kind of resources that Black and brown children bring to the classroom. So Yoso's model has like 6 kind of assets that children bring. There's aspirational wealth, linguistic, familial, social, navigational, and resistance. So for example, in the space of the classroom where they're facing often disproportionate discipline, children have to be taught at home. They often have to be taught at home, Black and brown children, how to resist this kind of discrimination and oppression and how to do it in appropriate ways that won't lead them to be in even more trouble. Also, the linguistic capital they bring. For example, coming from traditions of rich oral history and storytelling, and how could teachers really tap into this to help the children or provide opportunities for the children to learn within the context of the classroom. Memorizing these stories, memorization is an important skill for children to have. And so we're often saying what they can't do, but what can they do? Even children who speak different languages, when they come into the classroom, we're often having conversations saying that they don't speak English, but they do speak a language. So they are coming with something. We're often talking about what they don't have rather than what they do have. And so I teach and I talk about and I learn with the students about ways that we can avoid applying deficit lenses to children, and also using theoretical frameworks that are already in place. So when you think about critical race theory, what tenets of critical race theory are important for teachers to know and to understand and able to provide equitable classroom environments for children. One tenet of critical race theory is counter-narrative, our voice of thesis, which says that we should listen to the voices and the stories of the person or the people or Black people who are being oppressed. Listen to their stories. So we need to hear from the children. We need to hear from their families. Tell us their story, not the story that was created or constructed by society, but what is their story? Tell us their experiences, not us tell about what we think we know about their experiences. And also another tenet of critical race theory is the permanence of racism. So one quote I read and refer to often is that racism is so normal in America that when we critique racism or when we try to seek to dismantle it, where people are seen as critiquing America. So the permanence of racism is so permanent, it seems so normal that when you talk about it, it seems that, you know, you're making it up or that's not really happening. This is just the way it is. So those are things that teachers have to think about in the classroom when they're thinking about equity and intersectionality, and how, you know, this is a great activity for boys. What boys is this a great activity for? This is a great activity for girls. Which girls? Are this is a great teachers do, you know, community or community building in the classroom. Community building looks different for different people based on their intersecting identities. So when you get these great books, I go to these great workshops, you really need to think about, I wonder which children think that this is a good way to build community. Do we really, are all children taught that to come in and sit on the circle and talk about what happened at home before you got there? Is this something that is culturally relevant across communities? Some children are taught, no, you don't go to school and talk about what happened at home before you got here. So you think you're building community, but you need to find out from the parents, from caregivers of the children, what does community look like? And what should it look like in my classroom?
That is so interesting, and that's a lot for an individual teacher to, to tackle. And I'm wondering is there any? Do you see schools as a system coming together to reach out to a community to have these conversations, so that it is an individual teacher in an individual classroom, but it also seems like it's a neighborhood as well.
I do agree. I think systems, particularly in the United States, systems are built. We're living within these racist systems and institutions. So schools, the potential for schools to tackle these things is real, and they can do it. One of the things I didn't mention earlier is that I sit on the board at Drew Charter School, for example. And at Drew Charter School, we're really working toward equity and how to be equitable in all of our practices, and ensuring equity in all of our practices, and addressing opportunity gaps among children. So it does start at the leadership and moves down to the teachers. So schools and leadership providing these opportunities, but schools are just a part of individual schools. So then you have to take the system, right? The school system in the county or the state you live in. And then you have to go to the United States government, who currently is having a very huge, making big decisions about what goes on in individual schools, testing and those kinds of things. The schools are really, their hands are tied in a lot of ways, but figuring out how to work within these systems, how to navigate these systems. School systems need to figure out how to navigate these systems if they really do, if they really are committed to equity, and teachers in their individual classrooms too, even if their leadership, we talk about this a lot in our teacher education program at Georgia State, even if leadership is telling you this is what you have to do, how can you resist? How can you push back against it? What can you do in your individual classrooms? You still have a responsibility to be an advocate for the children in your care. And one of the books that we'll talk about later, Abolitionist Teaching by Dr. Bettina Love, really is a great book for teachers to read and to think about and to find ways to be abolitionist in their practices.
So speaking of resources, I know that you brought today some suggestions and resources that you would recommend to help teachers and parents understand the concepts we've been talking about. And so I wonder if you could talk about those.
So Stacy is putting up on the screen some of the resources I recommend for teachers and even for parents. The first one here, you see Deconstructing Early Childhood Education. So we talked earlier about constructs. Education, early childhood education is a construct that is defined and created by society. And so thinking about how to deconstruct these ideals about early childhood education, what taking it apart, like taking these things apart. These things have to be taken apart and examined and looked at, and who is it created for, and how can we create an early childhood education environment that is grounded in justice and equity and opportunity. So that is an excellent resource for, I really think, all teachers, is Deconstructing Early Childhood Education, but it also provides a model for how to think about deconstructing education, even in, middle school and high school and in other spaces. And then I have here the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And so many countries have signed and ratified this convention. However, the United States has not at this time ratified this convention, but I also always encourage teachers and parents and my staff to really look at this Convention on the Rights of the Child. And when you look at the different articles, to really think about which children really do have these rights. Not all children have these rights. And so the United Nations created this convention, and this goes back to what we talked about earlier about childhood not being neutral or universal. Universally, really all children do not have access to these rights. They're beautiful, and I wish they did. So taking these and looking at each article critically and individually, I think is an important task for teachers and for parents too, as they're thinking about ways to ensure that children are able to live childhoods that are joyful and equitable and full of opportunities. And then these two, Cultivating Genius by Dr. Gholdy Muhammad. Dr. Gholdy Muhammad applies in her work a historical lens to educating Black children. And so in her framework, she does a lot of talking about African-American children basically have been geniuses since the beginning of time, and there have been frameworks in place for a long time to provide them opportunities to display their geniuses or demonstrate it and build on their genius. But their frameworks are not in place in schools right now. And so she provides an equity framework across content areas to help teachers really cultivate the genius and the brilliance of Black children. And then we want to do more than survive abolitionist teaching. Dr. Bettina Love gives us lots of direction about how to employ this abolitionist way of being that has been in existence since slavery, but how to apply it to teaching in the classroom. And currently, since we've been locked down due to the pandemic, there's been many opportunities to join and listen in to Dr. Muhammad and Dr. Love talk about their work. So I would encourage everybody to really take the time to learn more about their work. And then Don't Look Away is a good book for teachers to look into, to find out about how to embrace anti-bias in their classrooms, in their practices, in their individual classrooms. The book Intersectionality gives you lots of selected readings about what intersectionality does and how it works and how to apply this theoretical framework to your teaching and to your daily life. And then some scholarly articles about childhood as a social construct, critical race theory, particularly in education, and Kimberly Crenshaw's Mapping the Margins, Intersectionality, Identity Politics, and Violence Against Women of Color is really the seminal work for her thinking about intersectionality. Although intersectional thought has been around really since the 1800s, Anna Julia Cooper, who is a Black scholar, introduced a lot of intersectional thought, and also many people refer to Sojourner Truth's poem, Ain't I a Woman, as a study in intersectional thought as she compares her experiences to the experiences of white women. Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality, and then scholars such as Gloria Langston Billings introduced the idea to the field of education.
Wonderful. This is amazing. I want to let our listeners know that if you have questions, we have about 6 minutes left. If you have questions that you'd like to put forth to Dr. French-Lee, you can enter them and submit them. But I will ask you right now, what can, I know we have a lot of teachers listening in today, but I know that there are also parents as well. What can parents do to support teachers in this whole journey of trying to create a classroom that celebrates equity and it really becomes a positive experience for all children?
I think particularly, I would speak to particularly what white parents can do. And one of the things that they can do is be anti-racist people themselves and raise anti-racist children, and to not raise their children to think that being colorblind is something to strive for and to want to attain. Colorblindness does not serve children. It does not serve adults. It really just says that you don't see my color, so you don't really understand my experiences and my unique social identities and how they intersect. So I think that's one important way, is provide opportunities for their children to meaningfully engage with people who are different from them, who come from diverse backgrounds, diverse ethnicities and colors and socioeconomic status, and meaningful relationships, not just in a voyeurism type way where you go and serve food at the food pantry, but really meaningful relationships with children who are different from you. And then also providing, for African-American parents, just really making sure that you provide then your voice to say, this is what we do in our community. This is how we celebrate. This is how we build community, and just try to, as best you can, to be an advocate for your child.
That's wonderful. I do have a question that has been brought to my attention, which is, we don't know what school's going to look like in the fall. It's virtual, it's in class, it's a hybrid. The jury's still out on what's going to be happening. But I think we can say that there will be a lot of virtual learning going on in the home. And so one of the questions that's been asked is, how does all of this play out with children from all different walks of life being on a Zoom call? How can families navigate that, or with this in mind? Or that's a challenge, I think.
Well, I think one thing that we're hearing a lot about is that parents who have more resources are creating ways for their children to learn together on Zoom and in individuals actually gathering together in spaces. So parents who have the resources to maybe pay people to do it, to take time away from their work to do it, who are not hourly wage workers, who won't get dock pay if they don't go to these hourly wage jobs. I think that parents could actually think about who is in my classroom who may not have the same resources I have, who we can invite to participate with us in this way, in these pods and these extracurricular activities. How can we help support these families who can't take off from work to teach their children? Can I take that up with their child? Can I find ways to say, okay, you socially distancing, I am too. You don't have the money to be able to pay this individual tutor, but I'm inviting you to come to participate with our family by Zoom, by these pods they're creating. So think about ways to be inclusive. With the way Atlanta's gentrified in the schools, I'm sure that you could think about children who are right in your child's classroom who may not have the resources or opportunities. So to invite them into your spaces.
Would that be something that individual teachers could assist with, really help pull together different groups in that way? It might be a nice way to sort of have it organized from a classroom.
I think that's something that the teachers could attempt to undertake, but keeping in mind is sensitive. So you don't want to take on children who don't have these resources as projects. So to really be sensitive as you're thinking about how to build this kind of community.
Okay, well, I think we're out of time. Stacy, I think we could speak for 12 hours on this. It's so important, so fascinating. Your work is so appreciated. You've brought so much to the Children's Museum, and I just want to thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.